It's the 30th of July, 1930, the first World Cup final. Uruguay against Argentina, in front of 90,000 people. The two teams walk out, and before a single ball is kicked, there's an argument, a serious one, that has nothing to do with tactics or team sheets. It's about the ball itself, because both teams have brought their own, and neither will agree to play with the others. Argentina brought their ball, a 12-panel model they called the Tiento. Uruguay brought theirs, a bigger, heavier ball known as the T model. These weren't the same object in different colors. They genuinely played differently, and whichever ball was used, that team believed they'd have the edge. So how do you settle the biggest match in the history of the sport when the two finalists won't even agree on what to kick? The referee, a neutral Belgian, came up with a compromise so strange it has never been repeated in 90 years of World Cups. They'd play one half with each ball. Argentina's Tiento in the first half, Uruguay's T model in the second, and here's the incredible part. It may have decided the World Cup. With Argentina's ball, Argentina led 2-1 at halftime. Then they switched to Uruguay's heavier ball for the second half, and Uruguay scored 3 unanswered goals to win 4-2 and become the first champions of the world. The first World Cup final was, arguably, won by a halftime ball change, which tells you everything about how wild and improvised the football itself used to be. So how did the World Cup actually choose its match balls before they were engineered in laboratories? Start with a thing that's almost impossible to imagine today. In the early World Cups, there was no official ball at all. Modern football has one match ball, a single, standardized, identical model that every team plays with, tested to be exactly the same every time. In 1930, that concept didn't exist. There was no World Cup ball. Teams simply used whatever quality leather balls they could bring, and different balls were used across the tournament. That's why the final came down to an argument in the first place, because there was no neutral, agreed-upon object to point to and say, we use this. And it went deeper than teams preferring different models. Even two balls of the same type weren't really identical because they were made by hand. Each one was cut, stitched, and inflated individually by a person. So every ball had its own little quirks of shape, weight, and firmness. No two were truly the same. Worse, these early balls had no valve. There was no little hole to pump air into. The ball was laced up around a bladder by hand and sealed, which meant you couldn't easily adjust the pressure, and over the course of a match, the air would slowly leak out, and the ball would go soft. In fact, during that 1930 final, one of the balls deflated so badly, it had to be swapped out mid-match for another one. The ball wasn't a precision instrument. It was a handmade leather object that was a little bit different every single time. Now add the old enemy, water. These balls were leather, laced, and unprotected. And leather drinks water. So on a wet day, and there were plenty, the ball soaked up rain as the match went on, getting steadily heavier, until by the second half, players were kicking, and worse, heading a sodden lump of waterlogged leather. Think about what that meant physically. Heading a modern ball is one thing. Heading a wet 1930s leather ball, with a hard lacing seam running across it, was like heading a medicine ball with a zip on it. Generations of old players suffered for it. The heavy leather ball, and the damage from heading it, is a genuine part of football's history. The ball didn't just get harder to play with in the rain, it got dangerous. So picture the full reality of choosing and using a ball in this era. It's handmade, so it's slightly different from every other ball. It has no valve, so it slowly deflates during the match. It's leather, so it gets heavier every minute it rains. And there's no agreed official version, so the two best teams in the world might show up to a final with completely different ones. The modern player's biggest complaint about a ball is that it swerves a bit too much. The 1930 player's ball could double in weight, go soft, and give you a headache that lasted a career. Slowly, the ball got tamed. The 1934 World Cup in Italy produced one of the first attempts at a standardized tournament ball. In 1950, a ball finally arrived with a valve. You could now pump air in through a syringe. No more lacing, no more sealing the bladder inside by hand. That single innovation, the valve, changed the ball forever. They never went back to laces. But the real revolution, the moment the ball stopped being equipment and started being technology, came in 1970. That year, in Mexico, a company called Adidas produced the official World Cup ball for the first time. They called it the Telstar, and you already know what it looked like, even if you've never heard the name. It's the classic ball, the one children draw, 32 black and white panels stitched into a near-perfect sphere. But here's the detail most people miss. Those black and white panels weren't a style choice. The 1970 World Cup was the first to be broadcast live around the world on television, and most televisions were still black and white. A plain brown leather ball was hard to see on a fuzzy black and white screen, So the Telstar was deliberately designed with black patches on white so that viewers at home could actually follow the ball. The name itself, Telstar, was short for television star. Sit with that. The most iconic ball design in history exists because of television. The ball was no longer just a thing you kicked. It was being engineered around broadcasting, around visibility, around the global audience. Adidas has made every single official World Cup ball since. The age of the design ball had begun, and once the ball became a technology project, engineers chased perfection, until, in 2010, they arguably caught too much of it. For the World Cup in South Africa, the first ever held on African soil, Adidas produced a ball called the Jabulani, a Zulu word meaning to celebrate. It was the most advanced ball ever made. It had been developed over 4 years, in collaboration with a university sports technology institute, tested in wind tunnels, refined again and again. Instead of 32 stitched panels, it had just 8, molded and thermally bonded, glued, not sewn, into what the engineers proudly called the roundest, most perfectly spherical ball in the history of football, and the players hated it because the ball was so smooth and so perfectly round that it behaved strangely in the air, knuckling, swerving, and dipping unpredictably, especially in the thin air of South Africa's high-altitude stadiums. The complaints were savage, and they're some of the best quotes in football history. Brazil's goalkeeper Julio Cesar compared it to a cheap ball you'd grab from a supermarket. Spain's Iker Casillas called it a beach ball. Italy's Gianluigi Buffon called it absolutely inadequate. Brazilian striker Luis Fabiano said the ball was supernatural. You go to kick it, he said, and it moves out of the way. Here's the beautiful irony. The engineers, defending their creation, insisted their tests proved it was the most consistent, most perfectly round ball ever manufactured, and they were probably right. That was exactly the problem. Real footballs, stitched, slightly imperfect, gripped the air in a way players had spent their whole lives learning to read. By engineering the ball to near perfection, the lab had accidentally made it behave in a way no footballer's instincts could predict. The next ball, in 2014, was walked back. More panels, more texture, more than 2 years of testing with hundreds of players, specifically to undo what the Jabulani had done. Football had discovered there was such a thing as too engineered. So here's the strange full circle of the World Cup ball. In 1930, the ball was a problem because it was too primitive, handmade, inconsistent, deflating, doubling in weight in the rain, so unstandardized that a final was decided by which team's ball was in play. For 80 years, football engineered that chaos out of existence, chasing the perfect, identical, flawless sphere. And in 2010, it discovered that a truly perfect ball is its own kind of problem, because football was never designed to be played with a flawless object. The game grew up on slightly imperfect balls, and the player's instincts are tuned to that imperfection. The 2026 ball, the most sophisticated yet, is built on that hard-won lesson. Not how do we make the ball perfect, but how do we make it behave the way footballers expect. From two teams arguing on the pitch over whose ball to use, to laboratories fine-tuning aerodynamics so a ball doesn't fly too well, the humble football has traveled an astonishing distance. But the goal, underneath all the technology, has never really changed. It's the same thing that neutral Belgian referee was fumbling toward in 1930, with 2 different balls and 90,000 people waiting. Just find a ball everyone can agree to play with. That turned out to be one of the hardest things in the entire sport.